Hi, I'm Chuck Samikian,
And I'm John Tallheimer. Welcome to the HR Stories Podcast,
where there's a lesson in every story. For those watching on the YouTube channel, I'm a little red. I don't know why. It's my lighting.
He's red-faced.
I am. You would think I've been sunburned or something, but
No.
still, you know what? I'm just happy to be on the HR Stories Podcast. John, those are watching on the YouTube channel can see like I'm still living in a construction zone as I get the condo set up. We were a little delayed getting our recording, so thank you for being patient because I had the plumber here. The plumber was here.
It's funny, Chuck, you say that because your construction zone kind of reminds me of like being in an organization and trying to make changes while the organization is still going on.
Ah, okay.
Right? Because you're there, right? You're trying to live in this space and you have plumbers and construction and drywall and all this stuff going on. And you're trying to concentrate on doing your work and getting things done. And that's sometimes when we come new to HR or come in as the director of HR or the chief people officer, the company's still going and we're trying to make cultural changes and organizational changes. And it can be a lot.
It can be a lot, and it is a lot here, but it's also a little bit like camping. I got my microwave and I got my fridge. Although that's kind of not really like camping, but it would be if I was fancy camping. John, what do you got today? I know we're mixing things up here on the HR Stories Podcast.
Mixing them up.
Today, you've got some great stuff. You called it podcast fodder. Podcast fodder.
Yeah, which is my term for all the things that I'm like paying attention to in the news. And I'm like, oh, this would be good podcast fodder, things for us to talk about. And so I don't know about the rest of you, listeners and Chuck and everybody else. I don't know. I feel like I'm drinking from a hose, right? Like a big fire hose. And
Lots
of
water.
Stuff is coming at me. And so what I wanted to do is kind of put everything in one document and say, you know what are the changes that the Trump administration is making that I need to be paying attention to? What are those things? And also, what are the things they want to do but haven't happened yet?
Yeah.
So I thought it would be just real quick, not really quick because there's a lot of things, right? But I thought it would be a good use of our time just to kind of go through these and just talk about them if we need to, or we can just go, yep, that's good, let's move on. But I want our listeners to be like, oh, I have a place to go back to. I can look at that. Now, we know things are going to change, right? Because that's the way life is. But it'll be one good place to kind of go back to and kind of talk about that.
Yeah. All right, great. So let's shoot. Let's start with, I think you titled this, it's outside of podcast fodder, actual employment law changes under Trump as of May 2025. So why don't you shoot?
Let's start with the federal workforce and union rights, right? And so one of the things the Trump administration did is they did a reinstatement of Schedule F. Now, you may remember back during the first Trump administration, they got rid of Schedule F job classification. And so, or added, or whatever. And so he put it in place during his first. Biden then rescinded it, and then that there. And so what this classification allows agency to reclassify certain policy influencing position to a category where civil service protections like appeals rights and due process no longer apply.
Okay.
And so the impact of this is it makes it significantly easier to fire federal employees whose views or actions are seen as conflicting with the administration agenda. And so basically getting people out of the way and so they can move along and that kind of stuff. And so what critics are saying is this undermines the nonpartisan nature of the federal workforce, and supporter claims it increases accountability and performance, which is a big deal. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how this plays out long term in there and what positions are easier to fire and what positions, you have to go through the due process and stuff like that.
Sure, sure. So, yeah, this is for federal
Correct.
workers and union, and doesn't so much just seem to affect directly the private sector, but I think we've seen over the years sometimes federal laws for federal workers sometimes will lead the way to private workplace changes. So that's one reason to keep an eye on this if you're not a federal worker. The other thing is, I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, I, I, I can see both sides where people have felt the unions are protecting underperformers in the federal workplace. You know, not everyone, maybe not many people though, joke about the government worker and the one that's just there doing their job or barely doing their job and they're protected by the union. However, I can also see the other side of this where it's like, hey, you may be doing your job. And I think we've seen this in the news. However, if it conflicts with my agenda, you are out.
Yeah.
So it can be a dangerous precedent either way, I
Yeah,
guess.
and I mean, again, this is for mostly the policy influencing position, right? It's not going to be for your park ranger at the national park that's going to impact, but it will impact those more policy ones that we can see there. The second thing that came out under the federal workers and union rights is the limitation of collective bargaining agreements in federal agencies. So in March 2025, Trump issued an executive order, invoking a national security exemption to bar collective bargaining rights in several federal agencies, including the Department of Justice, State, Treasury, and Defense. And the policy has already been upheld in a federal appeals court.
Okay.
So basically, the union rights for thousands of federal workers are now severely limited or eliminated in these agencies and does not allow them to collectively bargain, does not probably allow them to go on strikes and that kind of stuff. Very similar, I don't know if you know this, but very similar to air traffic controllers, right? They can't really go on strike. They can't leave their position, right? And
Yeah.
so that kind of
Oh,
stuff,
okay. Gotcha.
right? And so again, it's not again, I think you're right. It's not going to impact um, outside of the federal government, but it is something that we should be paying attention to, just to go, all right, what's happening, and knowing that in there as well.
Okay. All right. Good information to have. Interesting that it was upheld in the federal
Appeals
courts.
court. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
and again, right, somebody could go back and then appeal it against to the Supreme Court. Again, there's a lot of legal action going on with all these things. It's just really paying attention and go, okay, what is still there, what's not, that kind of stuff.
all right, great. What else do we have? I guess looks
So
like another government order affecting government employees.
yeah, so this section is the anti-discrimination civil rights. So it's actually two parts, but mostly, right, again, when we think about the executive branch, the president being over the executive branch, he's taken a lot of actions to influence the executive branch, right? And so this we've talked about this on the podcast. This is the ratification of Executive Order 11246 via Executive Order 14173. What happened was that long-standing order, originally issued by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965, prohibited federal contractors from discriminating on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It's also laid the foundation for federal affirmative action programs.
Mm-hmm.
On January 21st, 2025, Trump revoked that order entirely. And so what does that mean? Federal contractors are no longer bound by affirmative action requirements. We've heard that in the news. It's been a big thing. This could lead to significant rollbacks in diversity and inclusion standards among companies doing business with the federal government.
Sure.
And so again, right, again, I think that's been really talked about in the news. I don't know how much we need to get into details on that. But I will say, as a reminder, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 still exists. It is still law. We still need to follow it. So if you're a federal contractor, don't think you can discriminate against people just because you want to.
Right, but I understand that a lot of federal contractors, this with the affirmative action, they had to add in, and from what I remember, learning and listening as I've tried to understand federal contract, there's a lot of red tape and gobbledygook and keeping track of things and balancing and what they call racial balancing and this balancing and that balancing. So I think what it's going to end up also affecting is a lot of people. There was probably a whole army of people that was their specialty, to track and monitor affirmative action programs in companies. And I'm sure there's a lot of contractors that are kind of relieved that they don't have to do that anymore. However, they do still have to follow the federal law, the EEOC.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, again, right? I think on balance, um, hopefully companies will still be following Title VII and paying attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be interesting long-term impacts on minority groups, women in the workplace, and the federal government. We'll kind of see how that plays out. We don't really know. We can predict, but I don't know if we really know.
Yeah.
The second one in this section is the elimination of federal DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so basically, Executive Orders 14151 and 14168, these orders dismantled federal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across all executive agencies. These require the removal of DEI training materials, websites, programming, for federal use. And we saw this, right? Especially in the early days of Dodge, we saw this. They were cutting left and right, going, okay, well, this needs to go. And there was admittedly a lot of mistakes because they're using an axe instead of a scalpel. And so that really played out, and we're seeing that removal, which I do think will have a negative impact on minorities and women in the workplace. So the impact is going to be job-related job roles, and programs with federal agencies have been defunded or terminated, right? So people working in the DEI space, at least in the federal government, aren't doing that. And then guidance for private employers doing business with the federal government has also changed, signaling a clear shift away from race or gender-conscious employment practices. And so again, long-term, what's that impact going to be, and how's that going to be? And obviously, we can argue both sides of that, but I do think it's one of those things that we need to be paying attention to and making sure it does not have a negative impact on people of color, gender, et cetera, et cetera.
All right. Anything else? Oh, there's another one. This is another executive order.
Yeah,
they're all executive orders.
Yeah, so we got a lot more to go, Chuck. We're only on page 2. We have to go all the way to page 4.
Whoa!
I brought the news today, Chuck. And then one of the things, Executive Order 14168, redefinition of gender, defines gender as immutable and assigned at birth across all federal programs. This order ends federal recognition of gender identity changes, prohibits transgender individuals from accessing federal facilities or benefits in accordance with their gender identity, bans gender-affirming care in any federal funding health program. And so this is going to hurt the transgender community. I can't sugarcoat it. It's going to hurt.
Yeah, well, I wonder if this is going to affect, because remember that Supreme Court ruling about gender and sex at work and that sort of thing. I think that's still in effect, right? I mean, no.
Well, thank you. Oh, that's a good segue to our next topic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so one of the workplace protections and enforcement. So the EEOC guidance, which is what you're referring to, which came out in 2024. Remember that document with 53 pages and all that?
Yes, huge.
What you need to do and all that kind of stuff.
We broke it down and we went through that. That was really something.
Yeah, and so May 15th, 2025, U.S. District Court Judge Matthew J. Kaczmarski ruled that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission exceeded its authority by issuing the 22-4 guidance to protect transgender employees from workplace
Oh,
harassment.
wow. I missed that, John. Good thing I'm listening
That's
to
why
the
you
HR
listen to
Stories
the HR
podcast.
Store podcast. That's why you listen. We're up to date. And so the EEOC guidance advised employees that actions such as misgendering employees, denying them across access to the bathroom corresponding with their gender identity, or restricting dress codes based on gender identity could constitute workplace harassment. The impact, this ruling invalidated these specific provisions of the EEOC guidance, so just that specific guidance, asserting that the Title VII does not mandate recognition of gender identity beyond biological sex. This decision removes federal guidance that previously advised employers on accommodating gender identity in workplace, potentially complicating legal recourse for transgender employees facing discrimination. Now, this will be challenged in court, right? So again, this is one court. This will probably go up to the Supreme Court, and will be based on, oh gosh, I wish I could get the reference, but it will be based on the big Supreme Court case. So it'll be interesting where this goes.
Was that the one called Bostock?
Yes,
Bostock,
that's the one. Yeah. And so I think this will go up to the Supreme Court. I think it will be challenged in court, even though it was a judge. And it'll be interesting because I do think the way it's written, right? The way the law is written, it says because of sex.
Yeah.
Right. And so they're saying, well, sex is now defined as a man and a woman. But right. And so I think that's going to be their argument. It'll be interesting how this plays out. Again, is going to hurt the transgender community. And so if you know people in that community, definitely pay attention and make sure they have support.
All right. And then we move on to disparate impact liability. That's a big 3-word word salad. What do we got there?
Yeah. And so this came out a couple weeks ago, where Trump signed an executive order directing federal agencies to interpret anti-discrimination laws narrowly, eliminating disparate impact as a valid theory of discrimination in enforcement action. So disparate impact basically says this, Chuck. It says that if your policy is neutral on its face, but disparately impacts a protected class, then that's illegal.
Okay, right.
Right. And so what basically what Trump has said is the EOC is not going to challenge those cases. They're not going to go after those cases. They're just not going to enforce it. Right.
Wow.
But the law, disparate impact, is still on the books. Right. It's still under 27. So companies can get in trouble either at the state level or by private lawsuits, civil suits against them. And so being really careful with this, you don't want to be like, fine, we don't have to worry about this anymore. The chances are less for sure, but you do want to be paying attention, making sure that you're not doing that.
I mean, that's really something. Yeah. So the intentional discrimination, we've talked about that so often, about how you could have policies that unintentionally discriminate and you are just as liable, or just, even though you're not intentionally. And I know intent and is still a bigger penalty, but this is really something. I didn't know this one either. And I'm so glad I'm listening to the HR Stories podcast.
When there's news in every story. All right, Chuck, couple more things. Immigration and employment. You may have heard things are going crazy. So they revoked the temporary protected statuses for Venezuelan nationals.
Yes.
So the administration ended TPS for approximately 350,000 Venezuelans, is how you pronounce that. And the Supreme Court upheld this move, which means that these individuals lose both protection from deportation and the ability to work legally in the United States. So I don't know how many of those were working in the United States, but that could be a big impact on a lot of organizations, especially in construction, hospitality, and some warehousing industries as well. So I think that's going to be a little blip. And I think that's something to be paying attention to.
Yeah. So I can tell you a story here. We, where I work and where I'm the HR leader there. We don't hire undocumented folks. We run everything through E-Verify, but there's a number of Venezuelans and Cubans that have come in. They made appointments. They didn't come. They didn't sneak under a fence.
Right.
They
Yeah.
literally made an appointment. They got an interview, and they were given in documents to work, and they were given an asylum court dates. Yeah, it's 2 years from now, but I know that has been a stickler point. It's a political thing, and I don't share a lot of just general opinions like this. But I got to tell you, this is horrible. This is absolutely horrible, especially the folks that came in legally, and the Venezuelan people that I have working with me and for me are the hardest workers I can find. So I don't know why this is such a big deal to get rid of Venezuelans, but it is. I don't know. But I do know that there's a good bit of them that came through a process that was under the old Biden administration, that because politically that was not a favorable thing, they're cutting this program and they're rescinding a lot of their documents. And that's just not fair. But the Supreme Court did rule that it's legal. So it is kind of a done deal.
Yeah, right. And so, I mean, again, right. And I think, this, what happens is when there is a country going under some kind of strain and people need to leave there, they will sometimes head to the United States to get a place. And so in that case, there was lots of going on down there. So we gave them, United States gave them temporary protected status. And now Trump has said, you know what, we're going to send you back.
Yeah.
Right. And so kind of doing that. So the other thing that is happening is increased workforce immigration enforcement. And we've been talking about this. So though no law has been passed, the administration has directed ICE and Department of Homeland Security to increase audits, raids, and visa scrutiny on employers suspected of hiring undocumented workers.
Yep.
So that's a big thing. Employers in agriculture, construction, and service sectors report rising fears and uncertainty among workforces. Some businesses already scaled back operations or experience work shortages. There's been numerous ICE raids in the Nashville, Tennessee area.
Wow.
And there was a story the other day that it was a Saturday night and there was supposedly going to be some ICE raids, and managers were shutting down kitchens going, anybody that's undocumented needs to leave right now.
Wow. Okay. Well, there you go.
And so they were leaving, right? They were leaving because they were there. And so I think, right, again, we can get into the legality of this and why are managers hiring undocumented workers. But it is impacting them. And we're hearing from that community that people are feeling unsafe, not the undocumented ones, but the people that are even documented, have the visa, still feel unsafe because they're afraid they're going to be there. And so underlying this is work shortages in the hospitality industry, at least in Nashville.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so kind of seeing that.
Well, I haven't heard of anything down here yet, but I do have all my I-9s in order. We've did a whole I-9 audit just over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, which is a good reminder, listeners. If you haven't done an I-9 audit lately, highly, highly recommend in the next week or two, you go through, update your I-9s, make sure you have an I-9 for every single one of your employees. The fines are bigger, just the response to it is, like now it's a bigger thing. It's not like they're going to go after you and push you and that kind of stuff. So kind of doing that there.
What's coming on the horizon, John?
All right. So we do know, based on, I don't want to say research, but that's probably going a little too far. But based on what's happening, we do know there are some things the Trump administration wants to put in, right? So there's things they're thinking about down the road. One of them I found interesting is compensating overtime with paid time off instead of pay.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can do that in the government sector, but you cannot do that in the private sector. So we'll see how that plays out. I don't think that will be beneficial for employees, but right? And again, that becomes an HR nightmare managing it, and kind of seeing that. Changing how overtime is calculated instead of doing it on a weekly basis, maybe do it on a bi-weekly or a monthly
Oh,
basis.
okay.
So I don't know if that's going to be there. Forcing secret ballots elections for unions.
Yeah.
And so just kind of more union stuff and kind of playing that out. And then finally, repealing the Davis-Bacon Act. I don't know enough about that to go into details. But those are some of the things the Trump administration is thinking about. So again, HR people, leaders of small businesses, leaders, period, you need to be paying attention. We will do our best to keep you up to date, but these things are coming really quick and sometimes we miss them. And so if there's something that we missed, let us know. There's a send text message in our bio and our documents below. Let us know. Reach out to us at email us at team@hrstories.com. I think that's right. And so we want to know. We want to make sure you guys have the most up to information. I think we're in that situation where we want to make sure that we're spreading the news and the gospel and letting you all know what's going on.
All right, John, this is a great little departure from our normal format, but I think I liked it. It's informative and it helps our audience stay plugged in, help me get plugged in. I didn't know that they were looking to take the overtime, paid time off, option. I know that's in the public sector and a lot of colleges. My daughter works for University of Tennessee, and I'm like, hey, you should be getting some good overtime. And she's like, oh, I'm getting PTO, so I can take time off. I'm like, you need money. You need money. What are you talking about, PTO? You're 23, 44 years old. My gosh. Anyways, John, thanks for bringing this. Folks, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. And don't forget, check out our book on Amazon, The Ultimate Guide to HR, Checklists Edition. Just search Ultimate Guide to HR and you will see it. Thanks, everybody.